I think there has to be, for me, that element of surprise, because I don't want to have looked on Google Maps before I go there. I want to see, with my own eyes what's there, and not know too much, and also so my students can tell me about the culture and know all the little special things that make it different.
Welcome to another season of I Taught English Abroad, where we cover a range of topics from the world of TEFL. This podcast has it all, from passport stamps to recruitment, tips for teachers who want to be internet sensations, finding accommodation in far-flung locales, and so much more. Subscribe now so you don't miss any new episodes. This week, it's something of a crossover episode. When Gav and Em from the How to English podcast first started getting in touch with us, we knew we were onto a winner. After all, their comprehensive audio guide to TEFL teaching is an excellent resource. So, like the Jetsons and the Flintstones, Run DMC and Aerosmith, peanut butter and chocolate, other excellent combinations, we got together to talk about their exciting careers. Here are Gav and Em. Welcome back to the I Taught English Abroad podcast, and it is a special pleasure today because I have two guests on that I really do personally admire. And you could say that they're podcasting competition from the TEFL world, but being the kind of people that we are, they're on here. There's absolutely no beef whatsoever. I'm joking, of course. It's Gav and Em from the How to English pod. How are you guys doing today?
Hello, Ewan. Very good, thanks. Nice to be here.
Great to be here. All good.
So let's dive right in, because I always ask guests for their kind of backstory in TEFL and the places that they've been to, and you two absolutely do not disappoint on that score. So we've got a lot to get through. Now, am I right in saying that you two met at art school and graduated in the year 2000? So we'll go to Em first. Em, had you always planned on traveling? Was there a sort of traveling kind of background that you grew up with? And also, what aspects of art did you specialize in?
Traveling for me growing up was Butlins. I don't know whether you're familiar with Butlins. It's
Very
holiday.
So,
yeah. Okay. So that was as exotic as it got for me growing up. So I think I maybe had this need to go out into the world and see more. That I think maybe where my wanderlust came from. I read a lot about foreign places, so I always had imagination about that. But I didn't really ever think I would be a TEFL teacher. So that kind of snuck up on me. Art college and art university. I started off in graphics and then ended up fine art. So that again was a bit of a deviation, but it was fun.
Fantastic. And Gav, were you involved in fine art as well? What was kind of your background? And in terms of travel, was it kind of similar to Em, or did you move around a bit more growing up? What was kind of your sort of introduction into this kind of world?
Well, I was lucky because my parents took me on a few foreign trips to some interesting countries. So I did get to travel a little bit as a child, and I really, really enjoyed it. And the art background was, I was a painter. I still am a painter, really, although I don't get a lot of time to do that. But that was my passion, definitely. And we did meet back in the day in art school, and and stayed together since then.
So we fast forward from 2000, the year that you graduate, to 2006. Now, this is where, from a TEFL perspective, certainly it gets particularly interesting, because you two, am I right in saying you both did an online TEFL course? So first of all, let's kind of tackle this bit, because it's not really until more recent years where online TEFL qualifications have been kind of, universally recognized and accredited and that kind of thing. So what was it like studying online in 2006?
That is a good question. I don't even remember what computer we had at that time. It must have been something quite basic, but I think, Gav, you were always really into the internet, when it wasn't a familiar thing. I remember thinking, internet, what's this thing? But by then it had established itself. So online courses, I think, it was maybe a bit unusual to do that. But at the time, I didn't think that. Did you, Gav?
After graduating and then having a look around, we both were thinking about art futures. And then I remember one day my mum said that her friend's son had traveled to some interesting exotic country and was teaching there. And I thought, that's very unusual. I've never heard of this kind of job. I found out a bit more about it, and it was like to do an online qualification, and then they send you abroad. And I thought, Em, would you fancy trying this too? And we both said, well, let's have a go. Let's see what happens. I think there was a lot of emailing to our. I remember my tutor at the time was in Spain, and I thought, well, that sounds kind of fun. Maybe we could go to Spain and meet this tutor and do a similar job to them. And yeah, so then it just happened very, very
Mm.
quickly. I think after the online course, we also had a weekend. I remember in Cambridge, which I think, on recollection, we both really, really enjoyed because that was more hands-on, and then we got a more realistic introduction to what the future of teaching was. Do you remember that weekend?
I do, yeah, yeah. That was, I think, the first real taste of what it would be like in a classroom. Until then, it had only been theoretical. So the online course, I don't even think there was a deadline. I'm not sure, but we had, yeah, an online tutor who checked our work. So we spent a lot of time working on these essays, grammar problems. It was quite nice to be doing it together because we could sort of work it out and then go away and separately do our work. But
That was a topic that we hadn't a lot of experience of, to be honest. I never learnt grammar at school, so suddenly passing sentences and breaking down, how do you teach vocabulary? It was all so new to me, and it was really exciting. I remember thinking, this is challenging.
we knew English, we just didn't know how to teach English. So I think that was a really interesting thing for me. But yeah, I don't think the fact it being online really made a huge impact on me. It was more just the actual how to teach that was for me the focus. And yeah, the Cambridge weekend, it was intense. And I just remember the teacher she seemed quite stressed. I think she was teaching at the same time as training us. And I think she'd come from a lesson that day, and she sat down and she started speaking in a way that was really slow. And I thought, what's going on? And then she said, oh, hang on, I've just got to switch because I've been teaching beginners all day. And it just never really occurred to me. Like, that was my first ever interaction with the teacher for a TEFL. And I thought, oh, right, okay, I have to sometimes speak slowly. It was these things that never occurred to me. So that was,
Hmm.
yeah, quite an intense experience.
And also being told to stand up in front of a group of your peers and then suddenly, introduce them to a new grammar or I don't know, some word. And I think that kind of the dramatic side, because I also quite liked drama when I was a kid, and that part of my personality sort of got a chance to shine. Because otherwise, I'm very, very shy. But actually, when I'm teaching, a kind of another personality comes out of me a bit.
In 2006, you now, if I'm right in saying that you were teachers at a summer school, so talk us through that experience, because that's a really good route for getting into a TEFL career, and it's something that is still an option for a lot of prospective TEFL teachers. So, kind of tell us what that was like, if you could.
I'm just trying to remember how we found that job. I think at the time it was quite hard finding jobs. I mean, there were some routes that you could take, and you were always a little bit suspicious. Was it real? Was it a spam? Or you couldn't be really sure what you were agreeing to. But we saw something advertised in the UK. I think we were quite surprised at how well it was paid. We were like, "What? You stay there actually kind of boarding, they feed you, you just have to be available to teach these kids or teenagers for a week, or you could do 2 weeks." And we were quite impressed with it, and we said, let's try and get a job there. And we did, and they offers us the job immediately. I think that was our first experience of teaching anyway.
Yeah, again, it was quite fast moving. I remember just meeting everyone in a pub and then being taken to this amazing place.
The teachers, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The group, I think the leader, whoever it was, came to collect us and took us to this amazing place. Obviously, these summer schools often use buildings that are being used during the year, and then maybe it's in the summer they take over. The summer school takes over, and ours was in this amazing military hospital school, and it was just incredible. And then all the students arrived. It was a bit overwhelming because there were so many of them, and we weren't just teaching. We were getting them up in the morning. We were taking them to the restaurant canteen. We were making lunches. We were making beds at one point. I think I remember taking them on trips to London. it was
Doing
more than
sports
just a
with
teaching
them. There
job.
were a lot of
Yeah,
activities going on as well.
karaoke in the evening. So I think I'd gone to the, online TEFL learning how to teach English, and suddenly to be in this environment of just so many young people and doing all these things. It was great fun. It was exhausting, but it was amazing fun. I remember the summer was amazing. The weather was amazing. It was just like a dream looking back at it. Um, but yeah, it was more than I expected, definitely. I think summer schools vary, they are different. But the one we went to, we were pretty much doing everything. And when I had my first lesson, I was so stressed. I think I said to you, Gav, I can't do it. And you did it for me, which was just like the best thing ever. I was just so nervous. I said, I can't. And you were like, okay, I'll do it. But what was that like for you?
So my first lesson was your first lesson, you mean?
It was. But was it good? Do you remember?
Yeah. It was an experience. I don't know. It was pretty hard because the training hadn't prepared us for kids specifically. I think again, it was when you do all the training, when you're writing the essays and everything, you're like, you have this model student. The model student sits there, they're attentive, they're listening to every word, and they don't misbehave. They don't get up, they don't start climbing over the desks or shouting or, misbehaving with the other kids. So it was all really, it was in at the deep end definitely for us, but we really grew from that experience. It was incredible going on trips to London, for example, taking the kids with us, showing them around, so you became a tour guide. It was an incredible experience.
And yeah, making sure you had them all again when you went home again. That was also my fear that we'd lost a few along the way.
I
And
remember standing in the queue for just one more anecdote that really sticks in my mind was standing in the queue of I think it was dinner. It was during dinner, and you had to make sure the kids were, taking the tray. They were taking the knife and fork. They were all queuing. They were all behaving themselves, and just watching some of the kids who'd come from very far away, clearly not familiar with British food, and they were, they'd have their roast beef, and then they'd start trying to put custard on top of it, and mixing the desserts with the mains and everything. So I mean, there were little cultural things that we were helping them with as well, teaching them a bit about food in the UK and all of this. It was really,
I feel
really
like
fun.
beef and custard is something that someone might make up as like a pretend British meal. But there was just something I want to pick up on there. So you talk about the difficulty that you had with that first lesson, but was there a point during that summer school where it kind of clicked for you, and you felt like you weren't as overwhelmed, certainly with the class in front of you? Was there a particular moment where you thought, no, my training's kicking in now?
that is a good question. I think overwhelmed is definitely a word I would use to describe how I felt for most of that time. I still do feel overwhelmed, to be honest with you, Ewan. Yeah, I felt like I got into a groove, I suppose, and especially when I got to know the students and I knew what they were like. I'd say 90% of the classes were fun, they were great, I looked forward to it, and it was, yeah, this just steep learning curve. But mainly the kids were great and enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it. There was just that one or two, the two classes that you can't teach or that are very difficult, that for me I always focus on those ones. So to say click, it's hard to say, but yeah, it did get easier.
Well, it had to have, because your career since then has been phenomenal, and we'll try and cover as much of it as possible. But you had that excellent experience. I'm gonna guess this was south of England if you're going trips to London, and the kids were from.
All over. I think they were from China, Europe, Russia, Georgia. That first year, Gav, was there any others you remember?
Yeah, it was really, really those countries exactly. Yeah, and it was wonderful. That what I enjoyed most, and I think I haven't experienced since really to that amount, is just the international classes. So getting kids from all different backgrounds together. It's just fascinating. It's lovely to see them interacting, and they're forced to use English because typically they're just going to use their own language, and the other kids aren't going to understand. So it was doing our job for us. So we could sit back sometimes and just let them communicate with each other. But those international classes, I think, were some of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had.
There's a point to pick up on there, especially in 2006, because nowadays we're looking back in the 2000s as kind of like a sort of in a nostalgic cultural way, but going back to 2006, were there any sort of touchstones? Were there any sort of similarities or commonalities, in culturally speaking, where people could find common ground? And was there anything that you used in lessons to kind of bring all these different nationalities together? Because you could talk about there's things like there's universal things like football, like music, like what in 2006 was there a particular thing that kind of you could say and everyone would recognize, or
Culturally, it's hard to say actually. A lot of the time they didn't know the pop music or the films. So I wasn't really using a lot of cultural references. We did a lot of geographical quizzes, and because they wanted to learn about Britain, and I think that was the kind of angle they were coming from at the summer school. It was more of a cultural thing to learn about, the history of the UK and to go on these trips. But food, maybe traditional food was something they were interested in. But I don't remember using too many cultural references.
I think we learned quite quickly because we had a couple of lessons. I think maybe we prepared, and they were what we thought were really famous artists, musicians at the time. And you'd play the songs, and the kids would be completely blank. Oh, okay. So it was quite an awakening for us. Like, British culture isn't universal or world culture. So that was quite interesting. And then I think we suddenly realized that saying to the students, well, why don't you play something that you like? Because even then they had their mobile phones, so they had their favorite music. So, introducing their favorite things to the other students was kind of cool. So then they were all competing with each other who had the coolest music to play. But football was definitely something that united and divided the students. I remember a couple of times we did it. There was a World Cup or something around that time.
Yeah, it was Spain and Italy, was it?
yeah?
Because I remember all the Italians were in one place and all the Spanish were in the other, and it was just like, whoa, something's going to kick off here, quite literally. Yeah.
Where once you kind of you came out of that summer school environment, and I'm going to guess from the enthusiasm with which you speak about it now, it was clearly a really invigorating experience. But where was the first place that you wanted to go once you'd got yourselves qualified? Once you had that experience under your belts, where was the first place where you thought, like, right, let's get this show on the road, let's head out?
We had already applied for a job in China before we'd even finished the online TEFL course. So yeah, so I'm not. We were talking about this the other day. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but at some point during our TEFL course, we said, well, let's start thinking about where we want to go. And then we did we arranged the summer school and immediately applied for something in China. And it was just like, we haven't even passed our online course yet, and we've already agreed to this. We've signed the contract. We'll be flying out there in a few weeks. So yeah, it suddenly happened.
Yeah, we were kind of lined up already with these two jobs, but I think it maybe in retrospect was a good thing because it didn't give us time, or me time, to hesitate or change my mind. It was already, a sealed deal that we were going. And I remember just wanting to go far away. I think that was my one, prerequisite, that it was far away and different from the UK. So China seemed a natural place as well, because I think a lot of teachers start there and say it's quite easy to get a job there if you speak English. So it did seem like the natural choice.
I think there were a lot of jobs available as well. That was it. When we went online to look for jobs, there were so many in China. So we thought, well, why not try it?
We're just going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with Em and Gav from the How to English podcast, and we'll be talking about China.
Feeling inspired? Fancy trying something completely new? Well, make your best move yet by signing up for a TEFL course with the most highly accredited provider on the planet. Here at the TEFL org, we offer a range of online and classroom courses that you can study at your own pace. All of our courses include top-of-the-range teaching materials and come with dedicated tutor support from experienced and highly qualified TEFL experts. And what's more, we'll give you money off to do it. Just enter the code PODCAST at checkout to get 50% off any of our internationally recognised TEFL courses. And that includes our best-selling 120-hour Premier Online course. With that code, you'll not only get 50% off, but but you'll also get a free lesson plans pack. Within a matter of months, you could be a qualified TEFL teacher, out there exploring the world or working to your own schedule from home as an online English teacher. Just use the code PODCAST at checkout to get started.
And we're back with Em and Gav from the How to English pod. So in 2006, as you say, you head over to China, as basic as it gets. Tell us about that. Where did you go, and what kind of classrooms were you teaching in? Did you end up in the same school, or how did that work for the two of you?
Oh, it was a dream come true. We were in a private school, which was a very, very nice place. It was like a gated community. So we were in this little bubble of swimming pools and restaurants and libraries and lovely clean rooms and very modern. They all had computers in them, boards. We had everything we needed. It was very, very comfortable. But directly outside that school was basically a dirt road to get to Guangzhou, which was where we were. The Guangzhou then was, I think, enormous, but it's even bigger now. So it was this sprawling big city that was on the rise, and I think construction sites everywhere around where we were. So it was a bit mixed, to be honest. In the school, it felt like, yeah, absolutely great. But outside, it was a bit of an unknown, and we had to get taxis to try and pick us up and take us into the city. Yeah, it was what I wanted, to be honest. It was definitely an eye-opening and exhilarating experience, and just different, and what I wanted it to be, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Gav, is that something that you'd agree with? And was it quite jarring going from a very sort of gated and privatized kind of environment to such a big, sprawling, and at the time rapidly growing city? How did that feel in terms of kind of culture shock? Was there anything you had to kind of get over quite quickly in order to teach effectively?
Yeah, it was, but I felt it was quite separate. The time that we were teaching, that was, we would kind of so supported by the other teachers, by the leaders, by just people always checking we're okay. We had really nice accommodation. It was just amazing, and yeah, stepping outside it was a bit of a surprise. But we got used to it fairly quickly, and as Em said, it is what we wanted. That was the experience that we really wanted, not so much the being in this gated community thing, but going outside. It was pretty weird, and it took us a while to get used to people running up to us, taking photos of us, staring at us just because they weren't that familiar with foreigners being there. It can feel fantastic, and you think, wow, I'm a celebrity, and then it gets quite boring after a few weeks where people are still staring at you, still photographing you. But it was extraordinary. Yeah, really, really enjoyed it. And we love really good food as well. The Chinese food was amazing. I love international cuisine, so it was great for me.
I think I had no real idea about what it would be like. So for me, it was every day a surprise just to see how life is there. And yeah, it's very much a culture shock, I thought. But yeah, a good one. I think there wasn't many bad experiences that I can remember. I think the only just kind of going out, but having no real reason to be worried, but because it was so unknown, that was maybe the reason I was nervous. But once you get used to it, it's amazing how it becomes the norm. Giving directions in the taxis and just getting around. That's what I love about this job, though, is that feeling of the unknown becoming the familiar. I've always loved that idea of a place becoming everyday.
There's a really interesting point I kind of want to pick up on there, because you two have traveled extensively, and as I say, we'll try to cover everywhere that you've been, but it might end up being a 2-hour podcast. So, but there was something that you said earlier, that you didn't have time to hesitate before heading out there. Do you think there's something to be said for not doing too much research into where you're going next and just saying, let's just do it, and not on a whim as such, but having more of a sort of impulsiveness in kind of your decision making? Does that make it more exciting, do you think, or is there a lot to be said for very meticulous planning before you head out somewhere?
I don't think any amount of planning can really prepare you for the situation when you get there. Obviously, it's really important to research if it's safe, if you're going to a good school or a company to work for. So I'd say, I wouldn't go into anything just on a whim in those respects. But as for the culture, the food, the local area, everything like that, just exploring, I think there has to be, for me, that element of surprise, because I don't want to have looked on Google Maps before I go there. I want to see, with my own eyes what's there, and not know too much, and also so my students can tell me about the culture and know all the the little special things that make it different. So I don't do too much of that, really.
I was just going to say, I think we were quite naive, really, on reflection. We did just jump ahead. We just got on the plane, we arrived, and we just went ahead. And it was quite scary. I remember being taken immediately. I don't know if it was from the airport, but to a hospital. And then we got in a queue, and then we had like all of these tests done and everything. And it was like, wow, this was quite frightening. But then we just kind of went with it. But it was a real shock, I think, at the time. And now, when I think about it now, I think I probably would do a lot more research. And this information is available online, because maybe at the time there wasn't so much. But nowadays people are blacklisting schools. They're really talking about their own experiences and saying avoid this company, or this is an amazing company, and then you can start trusting the comments and reviews that other people made. Whereas
Mm.
I think back in the day when we were starting out, there just wasn't that information.
I think we really lucked out with that school, to be honest. It was amazing. So I'm sure there's other people that have not had that experience. So yeah, now I think it's a better, definitely more of a community online. You can check a lot more, which is good.
Great. And so, your next port of call would end up being Budapest. So, can you talk us through the move out of China and to Eastern Europe, and sort of kind of explain the decision-making process there? Because that's culturally and in every sense, that's quite a stark departure.
Budapest was everything China wasn't. It
I
was
see. Okay.
very, yeah, because we were teaching kids in China, and in Budapest we were teaching adults. We had huge classes in China and very small classes in Budapest. We were teaching general English in China and business English in Budapest. And it was, I would say, our first, can I say, real job? I mean, we went from 13 hours a week in China to a full time 40-hour plus, I would say, including all the admin and everything. It was it was a huge shock for me to change it, but I needed it, I think, because until that time we'd only really been doing a little bit of the teaching, and this was our real, I think, learning time for me anyway. It was the intensive working and learning, and yeah, for you, Gav, I think it was the same.
Yeah, I remember while we were in China, we both came to the conclusion that we weren't necessarily teaching as much as we were classroom managing, and just other things that were keeping us busy. And I think we both said maybe we're not quite qualified enough to be doing this as a proper full-time job. Maybe we need to look at some more qualifications, and that's where we looked for the CELTA, and Budapest was offering one at the time. And we said, let's go there, let's try that. It was an intensive month's course, and I think it was an amazing experience. So yeah, I've got lots of positive memories.
And I think we did it in the right order, I think, because we'd tried how it, we'd seen a little bit of how the job was abroad and in the summer school, but there was massive gaps in my knowledge, massive gaps in how to make a lesson plan and everything. So there was the need for that extra information, but also I needed to know I wanted to keep doing it, because it was a lot of money at the time to spend on a CELTA, and to maybe not know if you want to do that job. So I think it was really good to have the summer school and then the year in China, and then do the CELTA after that.
And I'd like to know just, I mean, obviously the two of you will have had very kind of similar experiences, but also I'd like to know if there's any kind of differences off the top of your heads when it comes to the CELTA. We'll go with Gav first. What were the kind of main things that you took away from doing the CELTA course, like the biggest lessons that you took from doing that? obviously with that kind of banker experience behind you, what were your main takeaways from it?
I realised that I don't, or I didn't teach in a very structured way. To be honest, I probably still don't. But
I'm sure you do.
the the CELTA does try to it does try to make you plan your lessons and think about the order of teaching. There is a very specific way to do it in CELTA, and I did try shaping myself to be more CELTA-like at the time. But I still remember, I'd get to the end of one of the teaching practices, and my tutor would be at the end of the class, sort of reviewing, observing, and would say to me, you still forgot to, do that thing. And I'm like, yeah, I did, didn't I? But I think they understood what we meant. I think they got it really. But yeah, it was interesting to think there was a very structured way to teach, and then there's maybe what you teach like after. It's a bit like doing the driving test. You're driving along and you're supposed to look in the mirror, so you show the instructor that you're looking in the mirror. But when you really drive, you don't need to look in the mirror so often. You don't need to have your hands in that position. So I think of the CELTA a little bit like that. It was a really important and good experience, but now maybe I'm somewhere else in my teaching.
Just quickly before we get to you, I would like to say that the TEFL.org absolutely endorses the correct use of mirrors and hand positioning while driving. I need to be very, very clear about that from a legal point of view. What were you kind of on a similar kind of way of thinking as Gav, or was there anything else specific that you took from the CELTA that maybe wasn't in your kind of teaching arsenal before, I suppose?
I don't think I had a teaching arsenal so much before. So for me, I was a sponge. I literally took it in, and I'm a bit different from Gav. I really like a formula that works. So it was a revelation. If you just test, teach, test, presentation, practice, production. I mean, it was just what I needed to hear, because that, I think, was the confidence. Like, okay, I've got my formula and it works and it's proven to work. Then I can maybe be a bit more flexible with it. But I've pretty much stuck to that ever since. I still do use a lot of the techniques. I'm sure you do, Gav. I'm sure you do too. But I found the whole thing an absolute, revelation, that I needed this kind of structure.
How long did you spend in Budapest after you got your CELTA, and did you feel a really distinct step up in terms of your teaching quality at that point?
Yeah, we leveled up massively at that job. We did it for a year. Looking back, I don't think we really saw much of Budapest, and that's maybe one thing I regret, because we were working all day, and then in the evenings I was planning for the next day. So, and also the weekend. So we didn't see maybe as much of Hungary and Budapest as we would have liked. But yeah, absolutely what we needed to do for the job. Really, really invaluable.
I think things like, first of all, we were offered the job immediately after completing the CELTA, which I just took as a compliment. I thought, well, they're really pleased with our teaching. So, yeah, let's stay with these. But I was also introduced.
It was an honour,
Yeah,
to be honest. Sorry, it was a compliment and an honour to stay
definitely.
there.
I was introduced to the teachers' room, which I never really thought was such an amazing and dynamic and exciting place. And we would sit there and somebody would shout, "Okay, I need some idioms for animals," and then everybody was shouting out these idioms, and somebody was writing them down, and that was the next lesson they were going to give. It was just amazing to be in such an exciting place, I think.
Hmm. And so, from Hungary, you end up going back to China. Was that to the same school, or was that to the same? Because it was in the same area, but what were your reflections on returning to China, having leveled up in terms of qualifications and with more experience, kind of in your backpack, if you like? Like, what did it feel like going to China that second time? Was it far less nerve-wracking?
Much better, much better. Sorry, Gav, I just want to say this, because for me, I felt like I needed to make amends, because funnily enough, I taught some of the same kids when I went back the second time. And I felt like I'd failed them a little bit the first time. Like, we had fun and we did, we got through it, but I'm not sure if they really enjoyed the lessons, and I didn't really feel like I taught them very much. But the second time I felt like, okay, now I've got some skills and we can have a better time. So it really was a better experience from the teaching side the second time. And much more teaching was done, I think.
We were more confident as well. Yeah, heading out and exploring the city a lot more. We found some favorite restaurants and cafes and all of this kind of thing. In the classroom, I think it kind of solidified the fact that I didn't want to teach kids. And I know that sounds terrible now, but I thought after Budapest, after teaching adults, mostly business English, a lot of general English, a little bit of exam English, I just thought, actually, my skills are not really with kids as much as I enjoyed it. And that was for me, like, yeah, I was ready to then return to Europe again, just teaching adults, I think.
We'll get on to those European adventures after another quick break, where we'll be right back with Em and Gav from the How to English podcast.
Are you looking for a weekly guide to what's going on in the TEFL world? Do you want some advice on everything from job interviews to underrated TEFL destinations? Well, the TEFL Work blog has it all. Every single week, we tackle some of the biggest questions in the TEFL industry. Stay up to date with the latest trends in English teaching, find tips to make your next job application your best yet, or get inspired and read about the experiences of TEFL Org graduates teaching all around the world. Whether you're brand new to the industry or you've seen it all, we can guarantee an interesting read each week. To find out more, go to tefl.org/blog. That's tefl.org/blog.
So we're back with Gav and Em from the How to English podcast. Now, we're back in 2011. We're all much younger, much less experienced. But in your case, you've got that time from China, you've got your qualifications, and you've come back to Europe from China, and you embark on this incredible teaching journey. You really have taught around Europe, and we'll cover some of the countries that you've taught in. And we'll get into specifics, but for first-time TEFL teachers, teaching in China has historically been a really good option. You know, you've got lots of different companies there, lots of schools there who are willing to take on less experienced teachers. Europe's a bit different, and I don't want to make generalizations about a whole continent, but from the research I've done, from the experience I've had speaking to different TEFL teachers, it can be harder to find work in Europe, and different countries have different expectations. So, as I say, we'll get into specifics, but from your own observations at that time, how qualified and experienced would you say a TEFL teacher needs to be in order to successfully make a living teaching it around mainland Europe? I'll go to Gav on that one first.
I think you just need possibly. Well, it depends a bit. I see with some adverts online, they just ask you to have a very basic TEFL qualifications. Others might be looking for something more like a master's, or they ask you for your bachelor's degree in that as a similar like English literature or something like that. But I think you can walk into, even in Europe, I think you still can walk into many jobs. Even if you're in that town and you walk into the language school and just say, hi, have you got any, classes you want me to cover? You just might get lucky. So I think it's still a little bit random these days, but we're very lucky because we've got a lot of experience. We can, get jobs, I think, quite easily. We obviously they still test us. They still expect us to do a little online interview and ask us a few questions. But still, I think even for new teachers, the opportunities are still definitely there.
And did you find that too?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think you can walk in, but as you said, Gav, if you're actually in the country, whereas all of our jobs, I think bar one, we've got remotely. So it's a bit more difficult, I think, to actually get yourself in the door if you haven't got any of the qualifications. But who knows? Never tried, to be honest.
It can be a bit more complicated as well because you may need a visa, like a working visa, for example, and that's a lot of responsibility for the company to take on. So they're a bit hesitant sometimes. So it does depend a lot on the language school again.
And without kind of delving too much into politics, has working around Europe changed for you since Brexit? Has there been a noticeable impact in terms of how freely you're able to travel?
Yeah. Well,
I'm sorry, so for using the B word, I'm sorry.
that is such a shot to the heart. That, but yeah, I think it's limiting. I think you have to live. Maybe you do need help now to get into the country to be able to stay for longer than 3 months. We haven't really been living abroad since Brexit, and it's hard to say sort of how it is now for teachers trying to get into Europe and live in Europe. I guess it's a bit like trying to get into China now. You need a visa, you need a a letter of invitation, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think we can all universally agree it was a popular decision, and we'll say no more about it. But you've both taught in Sicily, and that's I've not actually spoken to anyone in the podcast. I've spoken to people who have taught in Italy, but not necessarily in Sicily. Now, I don't know why I find that particularly interesting, but I do, and I have to ask about it. From your experience, what kind of appetite do Italian learners have for English there? Because I know a couple of people with Sicilian backgrounds, and it's all very much about the pride in Italian heritage and the Italian ways and that kind of thing. But from your experience, how keen were they to learn English?
Yeah, from my point of view, the students were really um, maybe that was my first experience of real people, because usually before, like in some of the other countries we worked in, the students were a bit like, wow, there's a foreigner, there's an English person walked into the classroom. This is a really, unique and special experience for them. With the Italians, with the Sicilians specifically, they were just like, okay, this is just another day at work, another day in the office. I remember sitting in the classroom and I was thinking, right, the students are 5 minutes late now. I'm getting a bit fed up. And 10 minutes after that, they arrived. They all had, sounds like a terrible stereotype, but it really did happen. They all had cappuccinos in their hands and walked in and said, oh, you're here. Do you want a coffee? And I was just like, you're 15 minutes late. This is not what I was expecting. So I mean, but I loved it. I thought, yeah, these are real people. I want to meet real people and have real experiences, real conversations. And yeah, they were keen to improve their English because they didn't get to practice often enough. So it was really nice spending time with them.
They're more interested in talking about life and philosophy and thoughts that are very deep. I don't know if they're as, in my experience, they weren't as motivated to learn, presentation skills and stuff like that. But that's only my very small experience. So I had a great time in Sicily. It was fantastic.
And we were working for was it the Cambridge Exam Centre, I think? And
Yes.
we were doing lots of preparation. So again, working with a few teenagers, we had some schools, but mostly it was with adults, and just giving them some basic exam skills. But as Em said, the conversation often became quite philosophical, and then we were just talking about something else completely. But yeah, loads of fun.
I couldn't even tell you what the Italian is for existential, but I'm going to guess it was got quite existential. Now, Sicily, I don't want to draw on kind of stereotypes and sort of like very cliff notes, cultural guides, but I do for my job. I write about countries in a fair amount of depth, and Sicily and Italy. Italy is made up of quite distinct kind of regions that have all kind of become this one country, and Spain, which was the next place that you moved to, very very similar. You've got these distinct semi-autonomous kind of regions, and culturally things are very very different depending on where you go. So obviously Spain's massively popular to teach English in, but it was Seville for you guys. Now what did you make of Seville, of Andalusia more widely, and what advice would you give to people who are wanting to be TEFL teachers in Spain? Because it's so popular, but it's got to be popular for a reason, right?
Seville was, yeah, magic. It was alive with culture. The students were very motivated. They wanted to learn English for different reasons, some for work, some for travel. I think there was every kind of person that I spoke to had every kind of reason to learn it. I don't know, really. I think it was all very, very positive. Gav, what about you? Do you think it had a specific feel to it in Seville?
My students were very passionate. I remember that they were really really keen to learn English. I think I was really into the city. I was into Feria. I was into the Easter processions. It was a dream city for me. It was so beautiful. And the experience that I've had in all the countries I've worked in, all the cities that we went through, you find yourself, you're on the way to somebody's office, and then you stop and you're in the most beautiful center of a city with a cathedral or with some square or something, and you think, I'm walking to work. I'm going to go to somebody's office now and talk to them for 60 minutes or something, and then I'll leave again, and then I can come and see this beautiful city. It was things that I think in our lives we never thought we'd experience. Countries that we never thought we would really spend time in. Like, you can go somewhere on holiday, and it's a good experience. You can be there for maybe a week, but living somewhere, you get so deep into the culture, and you get so much from the students as well. A big thing we talk about on the podcast is our teaching often isn't only about us talking about British things. We actually spend so much more time asking the students about their own culture and say, well, tell me, what's the best restaurant in Seville or in Sicily, or tell me about these places I should visit. So we did travel all over Spain, and these were recommendations from our students. So that was an amazing experience.
Working in Spain for me was the first time I'd gone into hospitals to teach English. And I didn't know that until, no, I did know that actually. I did know before I went, but I was a bit apprehensive about it because having never taught medical English or been to hospitals to teach, that's what I love about this job. It just goes to the places and puts you in these situations, and it becomes normal. And for the doctors I taught, it was their workplace. It became my workplace, and that was an amazing thing to experience. Yeah. Yeah, really, really good.
Right off the top of my head, I have to ask a couple of questions. First of all, there's a few different kinds of English teaching that I'd be remiss not to ask you about. We've talked about business English, we've talked about exam preparation, we've talked about teaching young people, we've talked about teaching adults, and there you've spoken about medical English. Now, I know it's kind of putting you on the spot a wee bit, but is there a particular favorite that you have, or a favorite memory of teaching a specific kind of lesson? And why was it your favorite?
Well, the one that comes to mind is helping one doctor to prepare for I think it was a European medical conference about one very specific lung disease. And I had to try and work out all the right pronunciation for the medical terms. And so he would give me the terms, and then I would go and research how to pronounce them, and then I would go back to him and have to teach him how to pronounce them. And I just remember together us kind of almost singing these words, and it was so surreal, like unfortunately I can't remember it now, it was so long ago, but we got it in the end. We both got it, and there was this time where it clicked, and we were like, yeah, we've got it now. This is right. And it was just nice to get the feedback after he got back from the conference and said, yeah, it went down well, and they understood what I said. But so much to learn. It was unbelievable. But yeah, all good.
That's so powerful. And Gav, is there a particular kind of mode of teaching from your career that you've particularly enjoyed?
I have experimented with lots of different types of teaching, from silent. I remember walking into the classroom and I didn't say a word to the students. They all looked terrified. They thought there was something wrong with me. And so I realized I had to write a couple of words on the board. But then, we tried that. We tried, I've just all sorts of different methods, but I still come back to the kind of conversation, engaging, correction, that kind of thing, and then like lots of inputs. It could be reading, could be videos, some sort of presentation or something. But if I could just give one of my most memorable teaching experiences, as Em just mentioned, I remember for me, I was teaching in an airport, and I had some pilots there, and I had some crew. It was just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And it's really nice because they say to you at the beginning of the course, you don't have to teach me my job. That's the one thing I can do, is I know my job. I know all the vocabulary. I know all the words that go to it. I just need you to teach me the chat. How do I do small talk? How do I do all the other stuff? Make it more accurate what I'm talking about. And I was having great lessons with them. And one day they said, right, we're going to show you the airport. And I said, oh, really? So took me out through the offices. We went through the duty free, and there was this little hidden door, and we just went through there. Security checked us and everything, until eventually we were outside on the runway, and we just watched an aeroplane land. And I was just like amazed by everything. It was incredible. And I just said to students, well, that was cool. And they're like, yeah, we see this every day. So it was, amazing. But we've met some fascinating. Again, these are things that would never happen in our lives. Like Em's met a very famous politician who I'm not going to mention, I've met some. There was a fashion designer once that I was working with. Just these people that you see on TV or you hear about, and you think, oh, I wonder who their English teacher is. It'd be so cool to teach them and meet, and find out all the secrets about their trade and things. So yeah, I always big up English teaching if I get a chance.
Amazing. So we're going to come right back after this break, and Gav and Em are going to tell me all about the podcasting side of their career. So maybe I'll pick up some tips on the way. And we're back with Gav and Eb. Now, our listeners are talented, and I have to assume good-looking listeners are most likely to know you from the How to English podcast. So when did you decide to start the podcast, and has it had any kind of impact on your career? Do you find that you have more opportunities with this online presence?
Well, I was already listening to a lot of very cool podcasts, and I thought, well, I can do this. Why not? And there aren't enough podcasts on teaching at the time. And also, so I think this was back in 2020. It was just before we were then told to stay home. So maybe I had a premonition that I would need to occupy my free time, and I wouldn't be allowed to go and explore the world. So yeah, so I said, Em, sit down, we're going to do a podcast, and we both just started recording. And we thought it's a really good opportunity for us to reflect on our teaching. Because often when we're teaching, we've both talked about this, we're constantly asking our students things. So tell me about this, tell me about your experiences, how do you explain this thing that you do? So a lot of our teaching is about asking questions, and we realize that we don't actually spend any time talking about ourselves and our experiences. As you've mentioned, Ewan, we've traveled a lot and we know a lot about teaching. We've got a lot of experience under our belts. So for us, I think, and certainly for me, it was my opportunity to start speaking.
Yeah, the same. I think as well as this, 2020 was a big year and things, as we know, happened, negative things happened. And maybe as the pod went on, we got more into that teaching room atmosphere that you were saying about how fantastic it is to have that staff room thing going. And I felt maybe that was good for us to do that. And somewhere out there were teachers, students who were getting something out of that and benefiting from our experience. Yeah, that was it for me, really.
That's a really good point, because of there's so many people had switched suddenly to online teaching. They didn't have the support from the other teachers around them. They didn't have that conversation going on. And yeah, that was where we hoped to step in. And the first few lessons sometimes confuse lessons with podcast episodes now.
Are they not the same thing, Gav? Are they not the same thing?
So the first few episodes were really just us chatting and really getting to the bottom of what is teaching. We were imagining there's new teachers out there, there were experienced teachers out there were learners out there. They just wanted as much input as possible. And so we spent a long time really chatting about our own experiences. But then it sort of grew after that. We got some feedback, and I learned the term native speakerism. And I thought, oh, okay, there are things out there, there are people out there, there are issues out there. And a lot of reflection went on. And that suddenly we started incorporating that into the show. So we were talking about bias. We were talking about spaces. We've got an episode which is all about non-binary people from different backgrounds, people with, we had an episode about neurodiversity. It was just about, suddenly the world opened up to us, and it was something we thought, well, we need to incorporate this into our show as well.
And our classrooms, obviously. I think those two things went together, because when our episodes got more diverse, I think our teaching and our perspectives in the classroom got more diverse. So I think really it made me more aware of students' needs, different people, culture. I think it was a really beneficial thing to do for both of us from a podcast point of view, getting to express ourselves, but also then taking those ideas into the classroom and learning from that and teaching that as well, I think.
Because we suddenly realised it wasn't just Gav and Em talking to each other; it was the entire world was listening, and we needed to listen to other people's opinions and views and aspects of life. So we really grew as individuals and as teachers, and the podcast was, I think, a great thing for us.
It's actually, I mean, you read my mind there a little bit, because there's certainly, and I found this myself as well from doing podcasting. Obviously, I don't have that teaching background that you two do, but you really do learn a lot of crucial lessons and a lot about kind of different perspectives, especially when it comes to a classroom. And education is, in an ideal world, it's a universal thing that we all go through, but we go through that as different people, as different types of people, and there are different kind of challenges and expectations people have. So it's a really interesting point of view. And we talk a lot with TEFL teachers who've made content online in different forms, and we always ask their advice for newbies, I guess. So with that in mind, and kind of with the last question in mind a little bit as well, to what extent would you recommend doing a podcast if you're a TEFL teacher who wants to meet other people in the profession and hear stories, and what advice would you give to people who want to get into broadcasting in some form? Because you two have done it so successfully, I think it'd be really, really vital to get your kind of perspective on that.
I would recommend it to anyone. I think it's a great thing to do. What I always try and do and had in mind from the very beginning was to talk about something I knew about and enjoy it. Those were the two big things for me, because as soon as you start talking about something you don't know anything about, it's clear you don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, I would say those two things: talk about what you know and have a good time doing it.
And on top of that, if you don't know something, then as educators, you have to go and learn about it, and then you can introduce that to people, and you hope that they're as interested in this topic as you are. I think these days everybody needs to think about having, a profile on a big social network. You need to promote yourself. You might want to record a mini lesson, stick it on YouTube. There's so much competition these days, but still, it's a great link if you're looking for a job somewhere and you say, well, I've got a podcast, you can check that out, or I've got a video of me teaching, check that out, or have a look at my social media account. This is what I do. This is what I'm interested in. It shows that you're quite dedicated to the job. It shows that you're quite serious and you've got quite an open mind. And these days, being online, having an online profile, I think is kind of key. Although it is hard work doing a podcast, but it's also really rewarding.
I think that exactly the rewards from the community and the feedback we get, it's so good, and it boosts me to keep doing it because there's people out there listening, and yeah, usually we just get such a lot of love and positive comments. It's just lovely. The community is lovely.
Absolutely. And kind of while we're on advice, and it's something that I kind of picked up on a little bit earlier on in the podcast, but it's I'll ask you more sort of directly now. The two of you have done something that's pretty unique in the sense that you've been able to work and live abroad as a couple, and broadly speaking, you've managed to work in the same schools or certainly the same kind of environments. How has that been, and what advice would you give to people who are wanting to embark on the TEFL lifestyle together? What would be your sort of main bits of advice?
I think you have to make sure you both want to do it. Luckily, we do. We both have the same travel bug and we both want to go to the same places. I guess it could be an issue for a couple if you don't want to go to the same places, or one doesn't want to travel and the other one does. So I think we're very fortunate to be in that situation. Can't say there's really ever been any issues with that for us. It's all been really good. But as you mentioned, Gav, sometimes companies don't want to employ couples. We've had that more than 2-3 times, I think, where they've said we can only offer one of you a job, or we can only offer you one full-time job and one part-time job. So it is something to think about. Maybe you might need to apply to different companies.
Yeah, it was exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's the same experience for me. I don't think we've had any other challenges from, the accommodation's always been quite simple. often with some companies, they will do all of that for you, which is absolutely amazing. Or you might choose to stay in some accommodation the school offers for a few weeks until you find your own place. But as a couple, maybe it's a bit easier because you've got double the income. You've got, maybe more ideas of what you want to do. You've got that support for your partner. So it can be very different to traveling alone. But still, even if you're a single traveler, you're definitely going to get support from the school. I mean, in our experiences, both, it's been really, really fantastic. So I always have positive feelings about TEFL teaching.
Gav and Em, if we had another 2-3 hours, I don't think we would have covered everything. So we'll need to get you guys back on. But thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. It's been fantastic speaking to you both.
Thank you very much. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you, Ewan. Yeah, really good fun. Thank you.
You've been listening to I Taught English Abroad, a podcast series by the TEFL Org. To keep up to date with every episode, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your streaming platform of choice. And we love feedback, so feel free to leave us a review on any platform you like. For more information about the TEFL Org, or about teaching English as a foreign language in general, head on over to tefl.org. That's TEFL.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.